AskRe did by Radiant Search 7441. What claims are just not backed by the historical facts? Deleted. A war hasn't been fought this badly since Olaf the Hairy, High Chief of all the Vikings, accidentally ordered 80,000 battle helmets with the horns on the inside. Captain Edmund Blackadder. I'm sick of curriculum materials teaching my 4th graders that the Spanish discovered Florida when they were looking for the fountain of youth. That lie was developed in the 1920s as a tourist gimmick. There's literally nothing in the historical record that supports it. Honesty lying. Einstein being a low-level student, his grades were average to top tier of the class, and he was pretty damn good academically. Part of the reason this myth came about is that in Germany 1 is the best grade and 6 is the worst grade. In Switzerland, where he went to school, it is exactly the other way around and 6 is the best grade. Marilyn Monroe never said, "If you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best." There is literally no documented proof she ever said that. True. She actually said, "If you can't handle me at my did least, you don't deserve me at my did least." That binary numbers were first used by Leibniz. Most computer histories make this claim. But there's an existing manuscript page, https://i.imgur.com/bkw3loc.jpg by the English mathematician Thomas Harriot that includes binary numbers and binary multiplication that was written around 1605, 40 years before Leibniz was born. Edit, spelling. Nice one. That ancient people thought the earth was flat. We have records from around 430 BC where Greek philosophers spoke of the earth being a sphere. In 240 BC the Greek astronomer Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth and was only about 2% out. There are modern people who think the earth is flat and they can read the White Star Line saying the Titanic was unsinkable. It was actually a shipping magazine that first called the Olympic class unsinkable. In a similar note, the RMS Britannic being called gigantic. The name gigantic only appears once on an order for an anchor. Every other piece of documentation refers to the Britannic as the Britannic. The Olympic class did more than their fair share of not sinking tbh. Both were heavily used in WW1, and the Britannic eventually was lost to a mine late in the war. The Olympic even managed to have one of the first, and one of very few known, sinkings of a submarine by a surface vessel, let alone a merchant one. Titanic was the shortest serving and least important, and the Olympic survived long enough to be scrapped when made obsolete by ships which basically copied her entire concept. Vomitoria were passages designed to accommodate large crowds, not rooms for actual vomiting. Vomit comes from Latin for spew forth dart. I thought that didn't sound right. The passage would vomit out the large crowd. That's so interesting, thank you. Executioners hangmen didn't wear hoods. People knew who they were. There are even several instances where the job gets passed from father to son like a family business. They were paid okay but also made side money from selling stuff used for the execution like bits of rope and fabric and stuff. Edit, there's a book called Lord High Executioner by Howard Engel that goes into the history of it and it's fascinating. Also got money from the prisoners or Thar family to make it a clean killing. More common during beheading. Of course they also bribed to make it not so clean killing. Again beheading. Oh oops, I had a heavy night drinking last night and my aim is not good. Gonna take me a few tries to get this head off. Catherine the Great did not do that with a horse. As I understand it, the rumor was spread by political enemies, but the reality was that she really liked cavalry officers. Edit, I was tired. The idea that medieval early modern people, especially peasants, were filthy, had poor hygiene and never left their villages. Medieval people cleaned themselves and their clothes fairly regularly. They even cleaned their teeth by chewing split twigs. Also, it was fairly common even for peasants to travel to pilgrimage sites on holy days periods. Yes. I just commented this as a main comment, but they also did not drink beer because the water was dirty. People have known for thousands of years how to keep shit out of their water supply. It's like a cornerstone of civilization. Snobs during the Enlightenment decided to rewrite some things and create the whole Dark Ages mythology. Deleted. Half true here is what I could find. No mention of pegging. Also it was her steward, not chief architect, who was rumored to be her lover. https://ebisupublications.com/scurrilous-cartoons-in-ancient-egypt/ That ancient humans were dumb. What if it's being said on the basis that present-day humans are also dumb? Which burning were daily occurrences in the Middle Age? I blame Da Vinci Code. Witch hunts didn't even start until after the Middle Ages. I heard recently that the reason Columbus had trouble finding funding for his voyages had nothing to do with the powers that be believing the earth was flat. In fact, it was pretty well accepted by that point that it was spherical. However, they believed it was much bigger than Columbus believed it was, and that there would be nothing but ocean for thousands of miles. They thought the journey would cost much more than he was trying to say. He was wrong, and the fact that he ran into the Americas was just luck for him. Young Earth creationism is not the historically believed position of the early Christian church or the ancient church. It's a fairly recent theological position initially purported by Seventh-day Adventist, but quickly became popular with fundamentalists due to backlash over evolution becoming mainstream. Before that, most people saw the creation narrative and Genesis as a narrative myth and was not meant to be read as scientific fact. Some dude in the late 1700s tried to count the years in the stories of the Bible and calculated the first year of creating to be the 4004 BCE. Now, creationists insist the earth is 6,000 years old and they have science to back it up. And you're right, the rise in young earth creationism was mainly a response to Darwin and other scientific discoveries explaining away creation myths. Never did Marie Antoinette say, "Let them eat cake." To be honest, history has demonized that poor child. She was married to a moron, she was in a foreign country, and she had no idea what she was doing. Also, her whole milkmaid village thing came about because she had nothing to do. She couldn't conceive an heir because her husband couldn't perform. He needed an operation, but he was too scared to get it, and put it off for years. That the pyramids were built by Jewish slaves. The Egyptians were good at record keeping and none of their records say anything about slaves being used for the construction of the pyramids. That's what Big Pyramid wants you to believe. Abner Doubleday inventing baseball in Cooperstown, NY. In fact, it's been pretty well researched that he had pretty much nothing to do with the development of baseball at all. Edison invented the light bulb. A more correct way to describe what Edison did was sponsor a lab and assemble a team that made light bulbs that were actually powerful and durable enough to be useful as a city lighting system. OHH, and also comes up with power delivery methods for the bulbs. The Armenian genocide did happen, no matter how much the Turks desperately claimed that it absolutely did not. The Kurds were responsible, and the Armenians deserved it anyway. And X200B. I wish I had something funny to go along with this. I don't. Thank you to System of a Down for teaching me about this. That every woman in the Middle Ages married at 12 or 13 and started having babies immediately. And they did not love and mourn their children as much as we do. That people in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat. As I understand it with the first one, it depends who and where you are. English commoners would be getting married in their early 20s, and were likely to be the same age. Mediterranean countries often had bigger age gaps, and slightly younger ages, say 15-16. There were of course extremes, like Isabella of Valois. Although that marriage was never consummated, the rules were to wait for the admittedly low age of consent of 12. However, that's an outside case, more to do with the necessities of royal diplomacy than anything else. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a fraudulent document claiming to outline a Jewish conspiracy for world domination. Published in the early 20th century in Russia, it has been thoroughly discredited as a forgery. Investigations, including one by the Times in 1921, confirmed its falseness. The document is widely condemned as anti-Semitic propaganda, lacking any historical or factual basis. That book, along with his later book The International Jew, and the film The Birth of a Nation, which was also the first film to be shown in the White House, went on to inspire William Joseph Simmons to found the second wave of the KKK in the 1910s. That Native Americans are descended from the lost tribe of Israel. They would have been, like, super lost, and pretty stubborn. The Holocaust never happened. I am baffled how people can believe this. I had a college classmate argue with me that only a few thousand people died during the Holocaust. College. He took the same entrance exams and everything. The claim Mormons make that the Book of Mormon is a historical record of a group of ancient white Hebrew people who lived on the pre-Columbian American continent and were cursed with brown skin for disobeying God, and those are the people who became the Native Americans. Yeah, right. The claim that Jesus escaped Golgotha, fled to Japan, lived to the age of 106, and is buried in a small town in Aomori is more plausible than the entire Mormon canon. IDK where it came from, but the whole Prima Nocta shtick. I'm thinking it came from Braveheart, but there's probably something else that came before it. To my understanding, the first time the idea is mentioned is back in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where it's used to show the former hero has become a depraved tyrant. Historically, we have no evidence it ever existed, save as propaganda accusations against rivals. It's always a case of claiming it's something the enemy would do if they took over, or aren't you glad you don't live in that horrible land where they do it? But yeah, Braveheart did a lot convince people it really was a thing after it had almost been forgotten about. Obama and the 2008 recession. He wasn't president till 2009. Trickle-down economics. That the American Civil War wasn't about slavery and was started by the Union. Both of these are wildly wrong, but various groups hold to them like an emotional support blanket so they can rationalize their chosen side lost. This is so bizarre since you can literally read the Declaration of Secession by South Carolina, which says it was about slavery and which was the catalyst for the Civil War. General Omar Bradley was stopped by MP during the Battle of the Bulge in WW2 due to them thinking he was an artsy infiltrator. The irony was that he was stopped because he correctly identified the capital of Illinois as Springfield when the officer thought it was Chicago. Just to be clear, since I don't really know the story, what is the myth, and what actually happened? The entire history of the Mormon Church. That shit is filled with inaccuracies and lies that somehow people still fall for and end up joining that cult of polygamist pedophiles. Leading Mormon polygamist Warren Jeffs tries to run his cult from jail. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Warren_Jeffs. He has over 70 wives, and his father had 65 wives. The medieval times weren't as horrible as many people make it out to be. First off, the majority of their torture devices weren't actually real and were made in later dates just as props. Like the iron pair that supposedly broke people's jaws, that wasn't real and they didn't even have the technology to make a legit one back then. Also, peasants got 150 days off a year. The church believed it was important to keep the people happy so they wouldn't start a revolution. So next time you're requesting days off, just remember, You get less days off than a medieval peasant. Mormonism. China does not own the South China Sea, no matter how badly it wants to believe it with its 9-line. Saying this as a Filipino, no, they fucking goddamn don't. That the Dark Ages were, well, the Dark Ages. Discounting that the Eastern Roman Empire was still around and would in fact last another 1000 years, much of Western Europe was in at least decent shape. The barbarian groups that took over Western Roman territory made sure to preserve as much of the imperial infrastructure as they could. Many Roman aristocrats still had influence in the provinces and had no problem helping their new overlords. Yes, some things were lost, but it was hardly the backwards dung heap that it was so often depicted as. The only place that you could even say was dark post-empire was Britain, and that was due to it falling early, a great deal of the infrastructure falling apart in just our lack of knowledge of what happened between the Roman withdrawal and the establishment of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms.